before I begin, I want to thank Jennifer Zwilling, the most incredible co-curator I could have ever imagined. Jennifer Martin, Josie Bockelman, Raymond Rourke, who, as Jennifer said, was taking pictures today. He was also the incredible, heroic catalog designer. Tracy and Teresa, who helped put this symposium and event together today. There have been so many people that have been central to this project, and I have to say it has really been an honor to be part of this and to watch this institution grow into the space we are all sitting in today. But most of all, I am pleased to be able to talk with our three incredible artists with whom Jennifer and I have had really, truly the pleasure of working with over nearly 3 years. So Kekuli Velarde, Ibrahim Saeed, Molly Hatch. The work that they have created for this exhibition is really the beating heart of the entire project. Everything, all the other parts of this project have flowed from this wellspring. And they have brought insightful and really extraordinary interpretations of the meaning of place. So when I came to this project 3 years ago, it was already brilliantly conceived by Josie Bockelman and Jennifer Zwilling. And this beautiful place that we are all sitting in was not even yet really a thing on paper. It was just an idea of what this place could be. Next slide. And as the building grew and started to take shape, so did the work for Making Place Matter. These three artists each began using clay to express their idea of place. But this idea of place is actually a fairly elusive thing. At first, defining it appears to be kind of a simple equation, right? Obvious, right? We're sitting right here, right now, in this place. Sort of an equation almost of person plus location. However, like all, or at least many outwardly simple things, what appears on the surface to be clear and straightforward actually belies an expanse of shifting ground underneath. Our own sense of place, of course, began to shift with the pandemic. What you're looking at here is a screenshot from our first council meeting, which of course was held on Zoom in 2020, a reminder of how essential place is, yet how its meaning is always expanding. If you look to scholars, pioneering cultural geographer Doreen Massey describes it as kind of a meeting place, this nexus that is constructed from a particular constellation of social relations. If you look to philosopher Ed Casey, he takes a kind of phenomenological approach, an approach with your body, defining place as this immediate ambiance of my lived body and its history. But of course, many have historically sat outside of that central narrative and perhaps have felt out of place, whether non-white, LGBTQ+, or historically marginalized by a physical or neurological trait outside of the norm. So today, through activism and collective action, communities have begun the hard work of expanding that single narrative into many. Place, I think, reflects the world around us and ourselves within it. So Making Place Matter is rooted in this expanded definition of place, and clay, of course, is this remarkably astute messenger. It is at once universal, it is found on every continent, in every country, and yet it is intensely local. It is literally made of the earth itself. And as a result, it could be argued that clay is the material embodiment of place. Like us, clay bodies are also defined by their place. The red terracotta of Peru, the Nile brown clay of Egypt, the kaolin-rich earth of China and of England. Each clay body can decree an artist's vision. But clay is not inert, as we all know here. It insists on finding its center. And while this idea of the center has often been defined by this singular middle ground framed within this language of ceramics, which we all know, it is very individual, right? Each person must learn the skill of centering as really this first step to magically transform a lump of clay into a vessel. And accordingly, in Making Place Matter, there's not one center, but many, defined by who is standing in what place. And as such, Kekuli Velarde, Molly Hatch, Ibrahim Saeed really offer their place in this exhibition. They have brought their own cultural heritage, their own personal histories, their own identities, their own artistic practices to this project to really think deeply about ideas of place. And for Kukuli Velarde, as we already heard, and I'm very excited to hear from her, motherhood was the inspiration for her work on Mi Vida. It was really initiated as this way to prolong the sensation of holding her school-age daughter, Vida, in her arms. And through this experience as a mother, as we heard, this universal instinct to protect children. And within this work, you will also see that Velarde is a keen student of art history and an expert at blending historical references from the ancient indigenous culture of Peru into her work. On the left, you can see Velarde's, one of her pieces, and on the right, a stirrup bottle from the Moche people made around 800 AD. They're, of course, known for these incredible figural vessels, and this one in particular depicts a woman in the form of a cacao fruit holding and nursing a baby. And just as deftly as Velarde incorporates the past, she is equally expert at illuminating the present. This piece that you are looking at here was made in 2020, and as a result, it is wearing a mask. Next slide. So Ibrahim Said brings a lifetime of skill. You could see this as one of the many ways that he carries place with him. And in making place matter, he really set out to discover absolutely new pathways in clay. And he is ever a student of the riches of Islam, taking his primary inspiration from this from the mashrabiyah, which is an architectural element found throughout the Islamic world. These are a threshold between public and private space. They are often made of wood. You can see several examples here on the right. They offer this kind of porous boundary between public, private space, shade, ventilation, physical delineation, all wrapped in this language of geometry. And the beauty of the mashrabiyah resides not only in the screen itself, but in these cascades of light. Patterned light that shines through these open work panels. And drawing on this pattern and form, Said took on a nearly impossible task. And I'm very excited for our tour today to really dig deep into these on the bank of the Nile, which you can see here on the left. These 3 carved ceramic panels, each nearly 6 feet high. And in them, wood's rigidity is replaced with clay's distinct curves. Finally, for Molly Hatch, the museum was where she began for making place matter, as she often does. And she looked to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where she was drawn, among many other things, to this Chinese export porcelain plate from circa 1825 that depicts the Philadelphia Waterworks. It's the first municipal waterworks in the country, and actually depicts the site that is now occupied by the Philadelphia Museum of Art, where the plate now resides, and you can see it here on the left. Hatch has used this small landscape on the interior of the plate as her primary imagery, enlarging it to this incredibly monumental scale. And as she does this, her original imagery abstracts, and in doing so, the details are absolutely transformed, shifting their meaning. Some are amplified, while others disappear. And these interspersed plates of lustered gold bring the viewer into the historical landscape, a portal to reflect the Philadelphia of today. So, grounded in clay, Kukuli Velarde, Ibrahim Said, and Molly Hatch offered their places in this exhibition, centering their work on who they are and what they have inherited. And with that, I am pleased that we will be able to hear from each of these 3 remarkable artists. And first, we will hear from Kukuli Velarde, who was born in Peru. She moved to Philadelphia in 1997 to join the Clay Studio as a resident artist and has remained here since. And so this internationally recognized artist is also a longtime resident of South Kensington neighborhood, where we are today. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. I just want to, as I was listening to you, I was thinking of what means place to me. And the Clay Studio no matter how many transformations it will have in terms of architecturally speaking, will always be the place um, that changed my life. And I came to the Clay Studio with a fellowship, the Evelyn Shapiro Fellowship, and I discovered the community that I didn't know existed around the material. And I think that the Clay Studio at that time when I came was a very intimate place that we would hang out together, the artists, and it then changed. And I'm glad it did. I miss that Clay Studio, but I am happy to see a place that has the strength to show ceramic in all its beauty and in all its importance, especially now when ceramic departments are closing in several universities in the United States. I feel like in a way, still art doesn't accept ceramic as an important material. I feel like we are guiding our art students towards considering art as a way of making a living only, instead of an exploration of yourself. And I mean, I cannot blame young people wanting to have making a living, but at the same time, um, I miss the times in which artists were um, given the opportunity to explore any material they wanted. And now without clay, in many art departments of Ivy League universities in the United States, we have a big fight to fight. And it is the Clay Studio, extremely important in this moment, because this is a way of many saying ceramic matters. And ceramic will stay here. And if the universities are closing the departments, centers like the Clay Studio, which is giving an example, will open and show the students, the young people, that ceramic matters. And they will come here. So thank you, Clay Studio, for giving that opportunity, because we must not allow doors to close to the most important material. It's like drawing. People should work with clay as they work with a pencil. That is the way to enter the magic of making. So this place matters.
Thank you.
Completely.
Beautiful.
Now, going back to me, um, I was very happy that I was invited. As I said earlier, the Clay Studio has a very warm spot in my heart. And I am a resident of Kensington for a long time. I am scared of it being gentrified. It is happening now. It's not something that we can deny. And if there were any institution coming to be part of that gentrification, I'm glad that it's the Clay Studio again. And just because I feel like they really honestly are trying to make a difference. And I feel like it's not just words, and that we need actions. So I trust that you guys are gonna make a difference and are gonna help in a way for the Kensington to keep its identity. And we are counting on that. Watching. So when I was invited, I was in the process of creating this series, A Mi Vida. And that is my daughter. She's 10 years old. Oh, no, that's not my daughter. My daughter is 10. I had her when I turned 48, and I felt that being a very old mother, a very old pregnant woman, I felt for the first time I was beautiful. And I never felt that. My sister is the beautiful one among the two of us, but I felt beautiful, 48, all swollen, with my body having these changes that nobody told me about. And that's why I was striking that pose of pride. I was proud of my body for the first time, and I didn't give a damn of what men who are always telling you in a one way or another, not men in particular, but the mentality of a patriarchal society, and I use that word with a little fear because it has been overused. But the gaze, the masculine gaze, was not telling me what beauty was for the first time in my life. Is it what? Okay. How do I do this?
Oh, that's okay.
Oh,
No,
I'm
You
sorry.
just control your own thing, and I'll go, when you change the slide, I change the slide.
Okay,
You just
okay.
go ahead.
So I created these pieces because I'm very, very melodramatic, and I was thinking how it's gonna be when my daughter leaves, and I'm gonna be an elderly person, and she's like 18 and bubbly and looking for life and away from me. So I thought instead of having photographs, I wanted to hold her one more time every time I got very depressed, and which I probably would. Let's be honest. And I created these children that I could embrace, and then all this thing about the children being separated from their parents in the border struck me badly. I couldn't imagine that there could be anybody willing to separate a child from their parents. And then all of a sudden, for being this very melodramatic, self-serving, self-centered, egotistic, narcissistic, all of those things, um, if you want, became this idea of sharing the anguish that parents may feel if something happened to your child. And I just wanted to express my shock. I was completely appalled. So all these children are in a way are embodying these kids who are alone, using aluminum covers, and we still have thousands of them that they haven't found their parents, and I just cannot imagine the agony. And that's what the series is residing now, in this fear of losing your child, in the anguish of not knowing where she or he is. I use elements from my culture because I am Peruvian. I grew up looking at this. This was not a research. This a research. This is more my visual landscape in the first 21 years of my life. I think the first 5 years really centered you in who you are. And I'm sorry, I'm going over time. But and then you have these children in the strollers, because the strollers are such a how you say cotidiano, everyday, everyday kind of thing. We all have had a stroller, or seen one passing by, and I wanted them to become part of our cotidianidad, no, of our daily life, and um, and that's it. I'm sorry.
My car.
Yeah, I want to invite Ibrahim Saeed.
Thank you
who
all
is-
guys for coming. First, before I start, I would love to thank the Place Studio community for the love of the clay. And that's really what makes Place metal for me. It's place itself, and culture, and community, and memory. And always with me, stuck in my memory, the good stuff, not the bad stuff. So I am happy to be here. Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me to be part of this project. Thank you, Elizabeth, for all the work we did together as 3 years. The Bank of the Nile bring really all these 4 ideas together in this piece. So, Mashrabiyya is architecture window you can see all over Egypt to now, like it's privacy space, divided spaces too. And it meant in Islam to separate the woman so she can if you invite someone inside the house, they can see here, but you can see everything going on. But also you can see that in the windows in houses. You can see that in 3 different periods of time. Like you can see that in Singak, in Fustat, where I come from, in one of the oldest church, and also in the mosque. So this idea of mashrabiyah and the screen that has light going through into the house lead me to work in the Bank of the Nile. So it's challenging to make this beat. First, when Jennifer called me, I was thinking about so many different ideas before I do that. And I remember we had discussion about mashrabiyah like 4 years ago, me and Jennifer when was at dinner. Okay, that's important. And I was thinking about mashrabiyah idea in very different way. And I can tell, like, idea for me is like plant, how it grow after time, and you can really get the fruit from it. So I'm thinking about my work so much before I work on it. The Nile is one of my, like, very beauty memory, which 5 minutes from Fustat you will be in the bank of the Nile, which when I was child, I would go to the bank of the Nile and sit, and I just look at the water and the sky and the space. I enter new world, I forget. Even if Cairo is very busy and you're always surrounded with people, but you sit in the Nile, you just enter into new world, thinking about your career, thinking about ideas, thinking about so many beautiful stuff you want to do in your life. So you feel like kind of place, it's just you feel like you are in heaven, really. So for that, I called the beast the Bank of the Nile. When I started the beast, really, I never thought I will do this giant, big slab ever. But the funding and the support of the Clay Studio make us to have the time and do work you usually not do it, you know. People know about ceramic, know that, I mean, I never thought in my life I will do this big slab ever before I started this project. And thank you guys for leading us to do something different. Basis for my slab was very important for me because I'm always thinking about the ceramic itself, and when I'm thinking about art, I'm thinking about something don't distract the base of the work. And that's first time for me to do inlay wood, and it's also coming from the idea of architecture inside the mosque or the church or the synagogue. And I think I did a good job. So I called the bees the Bank of the Nile really after I made it, because since it's very difficult when you work in project and you don't know how it will look like before you finish it, you know. So I'm having this idea in my imagination and putting them together in my imagination, but the physical work you can't see really before you make the wood and the allay, which take time more than I made the 3 pieces of ceramic for 1 piece, really. And the other pieces, someone helped me with CNC or something like.
CNC.
Yeah, CNC, yeah. Yeah, and I was like, thanks, Gus. I can do that easy. But anyway, the beauty about it, you can't really tell what you can see the piece before it's finished and you put it together, and how the balance of the slab standing like that. Like all this stuff, you think about it when you're working, but you have no idea how it will work. So I thank the Clay Studio for all their help and support since 2015, and thank you guys for me to be part of this project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Yeah, and just, since I didn't get to introduce you, you come from a family of potters and grew up in clay in your homeland of Fustat, Egypt, as you talked about, this kind of bustling, age-old center for ceramic production located in the south of Cairo. And today you are a U.S. citizen recently, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And make your home in North Carolina, where, of course, you blend this incredible material expertise with this deep fascination for historical Egyptian pottery, as you can tell, and Islamic art and architecture. So thank you so much for being here. This is the first time that Ibrahim has seen the exhibition yesterday, so this is something we have hoped for a long time. So we're really happy to have you here. And we're also happy to have Molly Hatch, a good friend to the Clay Studio. Molly had her first major solo exhibition here in 2010. She has had many since, and really takes objects from the past, often drawing from domestic decorative arts as her primary source. And I love what you have called them, precious witnesses to our stories, as this source material for what, as we will see, are monumental, really incredible ceramic installations. And with that, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to sort of echo the thanks that everyone else has given. And I'm speaking in English, which is my first language, and I'm nervous, so I can't imagine speaking in a language that I don't speak, as my first language. So I commend both of you for sharing your stories so openly and so poetically with everyone. That sort of backs up the honor that I have of being alongside the two of you in this opportunity to share ideas all throughout. And I think we each, even though our work is very different, there was a really neat thing that happened throughout the process of working together over the last few years of understanding where it did intersect. And I think it's really exciting, not only just material, but through historic references and our love of place. So I think that I have to say thank you to the Clay Studio too for being a pivotal and very, sort of almost like a watershed place for me in my career. That show that I had here in 2010 was, when my work was first introduced to my first gallery relationship, and also to Anthropologie, who's locally sort of their home offices are here, and set me off on two very different directions and two careers that sort of concurrently have grown on their own, and both out of one exhibition opportunity. So when you were asking me to come back and do this, I was like, yes, of course. This is like, if I get to be part of another, big moment here, like for you as well as for me, then yes, absolutely. So it felt like a real full circle moment for me to be able to come back and do this. And the work that has been put into the show was a really rare opportunity, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about it, but to have 3 years to work with two people who are very thoughtful and insightful, and took the time to come to the studio during the process and think about the history of craft and where ceramic is and how this all would come together. It doesn't happen very often as an artist, and so I have to say that kind of intentionality and the money that backed it up and the time that we were given to make the work was just unbelievable, and I've never had a similar experience before, and I hope I get to do it again someday. But I feel like now they're both close friends, and we're like talking to each other about children, and so I feel like this is such a testament to the time and energy and attention that everyone has put into it. So thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next slide there. I always sort of go back to history as a starting place in my work, because there was a point in graduate school where I was kind of like looking at this white canvas, if you will, of ceramic, and kind of not sure where to start. And there's a million mugs out there, there's a million plates out there, but how do I add to this conversation, right? Like, how many millennia have we all been using mugs, or cups or plates and ceramic to eat off of or interact with? And so for me, a natural place to go back is to point at a time in history that I'm thinking about or referring to or grounding myself in so that there's context for what I'm working on. And it sort of opens up, it gives me a place to ground myself and have sort of a foundation to move forward from and place the work in this bigger sort of continuum and sort of conversation about commerce and cultural fusion across multiple continents, like that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. And so that always helps me kind of figure out where to start. And so the museum here, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, seemed like a pretty natural place to start. So I went with Jennifer and Elizabeth. We met for the first time just before the pandemic, and like the last time we saw each other in person for a couple of years, and walked through the museum and the collections there. And I kept coming back to this one plate that felt like iconic, not only, or representative of not only what it is, or sort of pointed at the U.S. history and the unification of the states at the time, the Union, and the founding of some of the thinking of our, forefathers in the U.S., which seemed significant, particularly to the history of Philadelphia, but also to me as someone who is very much a part of that, story. My family's heritage is grounded in being merchants and shipbuilders and a lot of English family and French family and European history in there as well. So it seemed like, okay, well, this is my history that I'm pointing at here as a U.S. citizen and as an American with that shared heritage, New Englander, even more pointedly Boston area. So I kept coming back to it, and there were so many different things about this plate that sort of spoke to me, and particularly the symbolism of the Ouroboros, which is on the rim. You can see the detail at the top. And it was sort of surprising to me that there were sort of these like ancient or almost pagan symbols being used in this very, it sort of didn't make sense to me a little bit, but I'm glad that they're there because the symbolism is so rich and deep and goes way beyond what, the founding fathers were thinking about. So the snake eating its own tail, the Ouroboros symbol is a symbol of life, death, and rebirth. And just as we were entering into the sort of conceptualization of the project, and I had just done this research, we entered into a lot of tension in this country that we've been dealing with. It came to a head, several times over during the pandemic, and it's still something we're collectively working on in this country. And it felt very poignant to think about the symbolism of an Ouroboros to focus on and put positive energy into this idea that as we work through something, maybe there's a rebirth of a redefinition of who we are as a country and a people and how we can rethink things. So my first piece that I made for the show was this Ouroboros piece, which is the first thing you see when you walk into the show, which it's like big responsibility. But I really wanted to focus on sort of an abstraction of a pile of snakes, right? Like we're ruminating, we're thinking, we're working on it, we're getting through it. And this sunburst from the center of the plate sort of hopefully bringing some light to that, right? Like we're gonna burst through it, hopefully. So I'm gonna move to the next slide. So this is me working in my studio on it, and I can talk more about my process later this afternoon if you're interested, but I typically do all the design work in Photoshop and use these historic images and recollage them and work on them to a point where I can feel like a lot of the decisions have been made except for the technical ones, and then I'm executing it. So I project onto the plates and I paint on the wall, on the plates, or the whatever substrate, whatever object I'm painting on, using the projection. So everything is sort of already there for me. So scale works and all of the decisions are sort of already made, and I'm just in that meditative painting state as I'm making. So one of the things that came out of this show for me that was really important along the same lines of what Ibrahim was talking about was this opportunity we had some funding, thank you to the Pew Foundation for the Arts, the grant that we received, the honorarium, allowed me to invest in some very expensive molds to make new forms for my work, and some things that I had been like dreaming of and wanting to expand outside of the plate and sort of think about the space between the plate and the wall as an active space, and sort of thinking about it as a more sculptural opportunity to still reference the plate. So the discs on the back you'll see in the gallery, they're varying depths and have a side to them, so that there's another plane for discussion and pattern and juxtaposition of ideas. And then in the foreground, there's a new form for me also, which is taking it off the wall and into the space of the floor and the room and relationship to your body in a different way, but still trying to explore a lot of the same concepts in my work of juxtaposing different patterns. In this case, the snake skin, which I think of again as a reference to the Ouroboros and the new and me sort of rebirth, and a historic pattern from the Cooper Hewitt. It's a chintz, Indian chintz pattern from the 18th century. And that reminded me very much of a lot of the aesthetics and sort of underpinnings of my inherited aesthetics from my grandmother and the family that I talked about as merchants in Boston and shipbuilders in Maine, and wanting to sort of grapple with who I am in that sense in the past and who I am now, and how those things kind of become one thing, right? And the gold reflecting the viewer back into the work is another way of sort of bringing you into it, or bringing the present or the person experiencing the work being reflected back to themselves, sort of a way of inviting you to experience the work in person. So the opportunity to create new work, completely new work, in a non-consequential, like it's risky, right? And this idea of risk and reward is huge, and I think we discount how often we do it as artists, but there's a certain point, I feel like, where every time I make a new work, I'm sort of reinventing the wheel, if you will. Maybe a bad pun for a potter, I don't know. I feel like I'm constantly pushing the edges of what I'm capable of and what the material is capable of. And in this case, I was like, glue, I never use glue, I don't know. So really pushing, how do I make this not rely on these crutches that I'm using? Maybe it's the plate every time. No, what else can I do? So this pushed me to do that in a way that was, I had reflection and other people thinking through it with me, and it's so valuable to have that, and I can't thank you enough for that opportunity. And here's a view of Linnea, so you get to see that sort of graduated scale, so that you're really engaging that space between the wall and the surface, and encouraging the viewer to really have a reason to walk around it and experience it as an object, not just a two-dimensional image. And this is the waterworks piece, a view from the right-hand side. And I think, that Elizabeth spoke to it pretty specifically, and we can go on to the next slide, actually. It reflects the surface of this place, this plate that reflects Philadelphia. And for me, this was really it also an exciting diversion from my normal way of working with the plates like Ouroboros, where you just really have this two-dimensional image that's being portrayed on these three-dimensional objects. I wanted to interrupt that even more, interrupt the sort of abstraction that happens when you deconstruct an image by putting it on multiple plates or multiple surfaces, and interrupt it with reflecting the viewer in that place, and really drive home that this place that we're in has evolutionary change, right? Like this is one example where you are reflected in the work as the viewer, and you're looking at this historic place that was the museum's, it is the museum and was the museum's original spot. I think to kind of point to that continuum, and the same way that I work with history and add to a conversation, I want the work to do the same. And so my hope is that this work, for Philadelphia specifically, does that, but is still beautiful in its own right, even if you didn't know that was the case. So thank you very much. It was really been an amazing honor to be part of it.
I'm good. And now we'll kind of open it up to conversation. and discussion. If you guys have questions, we'll have those at the end, so please hold on to them. Those of you on Zoom, feel free to put them into the chat. But I wanted to build off what you said, Molly, about sort of this idea of risk and reward. Time is something that's really important to history. It's also really important to developing a project. And in this one, because of the pandemic, we had an enormous amount of time. And sometimes it felt like too much, but in the end, it was this incredible gift. It was this place to really be contemplative. And I think with the support of Pew and this time, it was really an interesting place to be. As artists, I know it is hard to take risks without support. And so I wondered if, and Ibrahim, I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit, because risk is so important to your process. If you could share a little bit about a piece that you had worked on as a part of this that was risk. Yeah, risky.
So when I started really working this project, as I mentioned before, I started to thinking about so many different ideas. I was not going to do the Bank of the Nile at all. But then when the exhibition got delayed and the pandemic hit, I thought, okay, I have this crazy idea and we have time and we have the money to do that. So I started to work in the Bank of the Nile. And when I started the first slab, it became safe. And that's really, I was very lucky because maybe if the first one broke, I will not continue the other two because it's risk and time too. But when it come, I thought about the other two pieces. And I was lucky also for the second piece. Third piece broke twice, and I have to repeat it again. But it's something you just give you hope. You can do that. And then after I did that, I thought, okay, why I didn't make this bigger? And instead of 2 by 6 feet, I go 4 by 8 feet for flying carpet. And this piece meant to be hanging as flying carpet. And I started to work in this piece. But technical stuff, the carving is very different more than the Bank of the Nile piece. And the negative space is bigger too. So the piece itself is very weak. So when you support that with weight, the pressure of the weight of the piece make it fall apart, snap. Actually, it made like earthquake when I was glazing it. Like boom, 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 boom in the ground. And it just takes like mostly like 3 months to work in this slab, and I carve both sides of the slab. And the slabs is very tricky because when you move a slab and turn it over and do all this stuff, any shaking when it's leather hard, it start to crack very easily. So the piece come well from the biscuit fire, and we start to think about glazing it and doing the color for it. And just me and my wife, Mary, moving it in the studio and putting glazed back face and putting down to work in the other face. And since we are standing, the piece did like that exactly. And it turned out like that's the broken pieces. Maybe I take these 2 pieces in the top, but it's the same piece exactly, but it's just like broken. So it's very good, really, to try new idea. Try something even with technical, and I do that often in my work. Yeah, like I do that I have patience to do that, and I am sure sometime I will repeat this piece again, and thinking about it more and try to make it safe. So thank you for.
It was interesting because when we spoke afterwards, you said, I asked about failure. And you said, no, that's absolutely not it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I usually, if you're familiar with my work, you usually see this challenging in my work. Like I always fail 1, twice, but I am very patient and I love the material of clay. And part of my problem, and my wife's problem too, that I believe you can do anything with clay. Anything you can imagine in your head with clay, you can do. And that's really sometimes a big problem for artists, because you're losing time, you're losing material, but in the end, you do whatever you think about. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah,
You
that's
know.
interesting, and I do think that, and Kukuli and Molly, I hope you speak to this too. These moments of risk are often those places where you move your practice forward. They can be transformative, and I wondered if both of you could kind of speak to what this time, how that may or may not have impacted your practice and your work for Making Place Matter.
Well, my practice, I think that failure to me is when an idea is not strong enough for me to do it. Not to have an idea or to have I'm not very sure about this. I'm not afraid of a piece cracking in the firing. I think that the most important is not the object, but the idea. And that idea cannot die because of a crack. And as an example, I just fired a piece that is like this big, and it's the bottom crack. And I worked in that piece 4 months. I thought about it, I wrote about it. That the process of making that piece was very exciting. I'm not gonna let some cracks to put that piece away. The importance of that piece is far more than the cracks that has at the bottom. I'm repairing it because to me, that piece is completely sound. It's the perfect piece for what I wanted. It says what I wanted to say. It took me a long time to work in it. To me, it's a complete success. A crack is nothing. And I think that we are coming from the idea that a piece has to be perfect, and no other, or at least I shouldn't say no other, but many other art approaches do put 3, 4, 5 materials together, and nobody is nobody's gonna say Rauschenberg's work is no, it's not complete. That tire is not clean. Nobody's gonna question that Pollock did all this paint that is sucking, is changing. Nobody, the conservators don't know how to, they have to have a special. But when we go to ceramic, we are thinking about a functional piece that has to be because it's gonna be used. But when you are an artist, nothing should stop you. If the idea is sound, the piece is sound. Now I understand when it gets to that point. There has to be consideration.
It depends about the idea too, what you are doing and what you are believing in. It depends about the idea. Everyone has different way of thinking.
Yeah, Molly?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm coming from a studio pottery background and the tradition of craft there. It was a huge relief to walk through the European collections with the European curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston when I was researching for a book that I wrote a few years ago, and see all these insane cracks in the Meissen white porcelain pieces, because it was they still there was so much value in the material itself that they still valued the object despite those flaws. And it was sort of a moment for me to think, okay, where is it? Like I had to kind of take that in for a minute and like think about where it's okay and where it's not okay to have those moments in my own work. But I think for me, I pay homage to the fact that I'm making plates that are part of that studio pottery tradition, even though they're sculptural objects. And so I wanted them to be, I want that craftsmanship and I studied with, after I finished my undergraduate degree, I went and worked as an apprentice potter to Miranda Thomas in Vermont, and she was one of Michael Cardew's last students. And so, Cardew's grandson, Ara Cardew, was there working alongside me. And what I inherited from that experience was that you inherit a practice as in a traditional apprenticeship or sense, and it's very different than an American apprenticeship in that the idea was that I'm continuing a lineage of the Leach Cardew tradition as someone who was studied with them, studied with their disciples essentially. And the idea is that you are taking what we're offering you and adding to the conversation. And there was something incredibly beautiful about not divorcing your work or making your work separate from that, making your work a continuation of that. So that is something that is in the back of my mind whenever I'm making work. And I think that's part of the importance of honoring that studio pottery tradition in the work. But for me, in this case, the risk was really that, like, how do I answer this question that's been bugging me for years? Like, do I have to have it be a plate? Like, what else can I do to push this beyond that? And I've tried answering that question with other sculptural objects on the wall in the past, but I think for me it was like the risk was, okay, I know all the flaws of Linnea, right? Like I did that piece, the big stacked piece that's downstairs with the gold on the edges, and I designed it in a way that I had to make it in one specific way. Like they weren't modular pieces because I had gold on the outside. If I had one piece that didn't work out, I had to remake it because the gold had to sit in exactly the right way on the outside. So I got myself into this position where every time you guys added more time, I was like, oh, thank God. There's 3 more bricks that I have to remake on that one piece. And it was sort of like, got to this point where, I wasn't sure how it was really going to come together. And, I was pushing all kinds of edges. I don't usually work dimensionally like that. How do you see it from all sides? And then we showed up and there was the plinth conversation. We had designed a plinth that was going to happen, and then it didn't happen. And we were like, how do we, the day we're installing, we were like, but there's no plinth. Okay, we have to figure this out. So there are all these moments, I think, in any studio practice or artistic practice that people always ask how long it takes to make a piece of work. And when I worked at that Miranda Thomas's with Ara Cardew, Ara would always say, 25 years and 5 minutes, and there's so much truth to that, actually, because it's like every mistake that I've made along the way adds to that. Like you said, you're going to go back and maybe make that piece again, but how you're going to do it differently this time because you've made the errors that you made before. And so it's not that it's not possible, it's just not possible in that first attempt or the approach that you made. And I know I'm going to make more of these stacking pieces, and I know exactly what I'm not going to do to myself next time I do it. And so it's like every time you push scale so huge that it's 3 stories tall, and I didn't know the first time that there's this moment in every process of making work where I think you make a leap of faith that you're going to be able to follow through on something, and I think it's really hard. You start to trust that you can do it, that you can, I don't know if it's pull it off or but I'll never forget pulling into the High Museum in Atlanta with a truck full of plates, knowing that I didn't have a 27-foot high wall to install the work on and not know what that, did I actually pull it off? I guess we'll know when we install the work in the museum. I'm you have no idea. And you kind of trust yourself just enough to know that maybe the mistakes you made are going to inform how you do it better next time. But I think that's where, like, if I knew the answer all the time, I'd be done. Like, I don't think I'd be making work anymore. I think I would be like, cool, I'm going to go be an accountant now or something. Like, I have so many questions that I want to answer still, and there's so much history that I haven't explored and added to my 2 cents to the conversation that I think,
I mean, it's nice to have a problem, you know.
Yeah.
It
It's really nice.
You learn from that a lot, you
Right.
know. And then when you think about it next time, you will avoid so many technical stuff you go through, you know. So
It's pretty rare that you get like photography crew following every step of your mistakes along the way, and then show it to people on a panel. Like, I'm sorry that like I don't have video of my like mess ups of me
I
going in the
wish-
studio going, oh my god, I have to re-glue that. How do I can't re-glue that. I have to
I really was very sad because I didn't film this. It was like earthquake. It was so, yeah.
Well, we have about 10 minutes.
But also, guys, if you remember, I said idea is like plant, you know?
Yeah.
That's a plant.
Right.
So you don't know what will come from that
Right.
in coming 2-3 years, you know? So you have to think about it carefully and very nice.
Well, that's interesting actually, because that kind of leads back to we invited each of you because of your deep connections to history, which is of course related to place. And it's interesting also as we go down to the tour, and we'll dig a little deeper into the actual work, but landscape, which you would think is like the kind of classic way to represent place, there's actually almost none of it in this work. And so I wondered if each of you could kind of talk very briefly just about your conception of place, maybe even when you began this project and what you sort of came out with, but your sort of ideas and frameworks and how you thought about place in this work.
For me, I mean, like, you know, usually my work inspired from Islamic architecture and geometric design and facade and beauty of communities and beauty of culture. So I think this piece become from all these ideas together. So my challenge was how to bring all these layer of thinking together in one piece. So I started really, I mean, like what I said, I was first project I did for the clay studio, and we met in the on one time. It was very simple. It was wall piece. I was thinking about the mosque shape, and I don't know, like I don't know how to translate this into English, but we called it Arais. Arais, which is the fence of the mosque. You can see in the top, like this beautiful shape going like that. And it's also architecture idea. So, but everyone crossing, seeing mosque, they just see the wall from outside. They doesn't look inside deeply and see what's going on inside this space or inside this place. And it tied me back to the idea of Jacques Filter and the hidden beauty. You can't see really from looking like that. You have to enter it and look inside and see it. And this work come from the same way of thinking, you know, of the same idea. So
I think for me, I was listening to the idea of, I mean, I think I was thinking about this in the context of almost like an action, like we're making this place matter, right? Like how, I think that was my interpretation of the idea of making place matter as an exhibition and as a sort of thought around this new community and space that you're entering as an organization. And for me, it was sort of a bigger assignment in thinking about how do I connect where this place is today, my experience of that place as a woman, as a U.S. citizen, in the history of America and Philadelphia as a city, and like I was sort of trying to pull threads together about how you ground a new place in an old place, right? And my work is good at making something old new again, or rethinking something or giving a new perspective on something that already exists. And so I think it was actually almost like a verb for me. It was like, let's make this place matter. Like, how do we bring old Philadelphia to new Philadelphia, and how do I comment on that as an American? And then, it really was timely in that having that moment just before the pandemic happening, having a lot of time to personally reflect on a bunch of things, and then think about our American experience and sort of the conversations that almost giving the pandemic gave us room and time and perspective in a way that I don't really think we would have had in any other context. I think it would have been more explosive and more violent maybe if we hadn't had space to think about it as a country. And so I felt like it was a timely moment to incorporate some of my thinking about this idea of how do we move through this and rebirth or redefine a place, if that's a country, if that's a neighborhood, if that's in the community conversation that we were part of, that first committee meeting that we were a part of as well was really important to me in thinking about that approach to the show too. So I think for me that was sort of the direction I went with in this.
Well, to me, it makes me think about the meaning of place. I sometimes I close my eyes and I try to imagine how this was 300 years ago and who this space belonged to. And I imagine animals and vegetables and trees and bushes and life and that life is not here anymore. We have built with concrete on them, and who this place belong? And I'm not talking about the Clay Studio, but Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the United States. Who does this belong? Why? What is the where is the idea of ownership of land bringing us to? And 300 years ago, nothing of this exuberance of a city and a country were here. And there were others to which it belonged to. So we don't really have ownership, and but we try, and then we talk about real estate, and we talk about cities, and we talk about countries, and then we talk about borders, and then we talk about I am, you're not. And I'm thinking about migrants, because I'm an immigrant here, and I stand up here as an artist and as a person, and I wonder, is this my place? I'm 30 years in the United States. Is this my place? I don't speak English as a first language speaker. Is it my place? I'm afraid of what happens to children in the border. I'm afraid of having a different voice sometimes. Am I an artist that belongs to this universal Western art? No. Is this my place? And I wonder, I wonder, and I think that that at the same time I am a place. I'm bringing where I grew up. I'm bringing what I saw when I was a kid. I'm bringing my sense of taste. I'm bringing my aesthetics. I'm bringing my broken English. I am all of those things. I am my place, and I will be myself anywhere I am. And we all should feel that we belong here, with papers, without papers, with visas, with citizenship. We belong here because none of us belong here.
I am going to apologize. In my flustered beginning, I did not acknowledge the land that we are on, which is the land of the Lenni Lenape people, who are the original and ongoing caretakers of this land. I apologize. I usually do, and this is such an important moment to do it. Thank you, everyone. So happy and excited to start this conversation with you. Thank you all for being here.